Okay.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this fourth Analysis and Activism talk. My name is Stefano Carpani, and I'm one of the three committee members of Analysis and Activism, along with Monica Lucci and Tina Papic. We organized this conversation more than 6 weeks ago, and we titled this conversation, Waiting for Godot, Waiting for War. Unfortunately, war has started, and today we will have a different look than the one we expected. Tonight, we will look at Kyiv. We have Dmytro Zalesky from Kyiv, our colleague. And before Tina will introduce Dmytro, I would like, on behalf of our community of Analysis and Activism, of the Steering Committee of Analysis and Activism, the IAAP, I would like to take this opportunity to share our deep solidarity and also to take this evening as an opportunity for a depth look at what is going on against media voyeurism. I would like also to thank our colleagues at It's Complicated who picked up on our idea, intuition, to support Ukrainians donating free online sessions. There are already more than 100 therapists that volunteered, and already many Ukrainians are asking for assistance. If you are a therapist, please sign up if you want to donate. If you are Ukrainian, please sign up to get psychological counseling. I would like to thank President-elect Mr. Berg for being here tonight. I would like to thank past President Tom Kelly and Luigi Zoya to be here tonight. Ine?
Yes. I will now introduce our guest. Our guest is well known in Jungian community, Dr. Dmytro Zalesky. He's a medical doctor, psychiatrist, and Jungian analyst. He graduated in 1988 from Kyiv Medical Institute with a degree in medicine from Department of Psychiatry. He worked at Kyiv City Psycho-neurological Hospital #1, and then at All Union Research Center for Radiation Medicine at the USSR Academy of Medical Sciences. From 1986 to 1991, he worked as a liquidator of consequences of Chernobyl disaster as a medical assistant, neurologist, and psychotherapist. He is the first president of the official development group of IAAP in Ukrainian. Among many things, he also served in the army forces of Ukraine for mobilization as chief of battalion's medical service between 2015 and 2016. So he is also a war veteran. Welcome, Dmytro. And now I would give you the word.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you very much, colleagues. And I feel a lot of support from you, and not only me, also my colleagues also. And I'm happy to see a lot of my pleasant faces. Yes, I could see a lot of my friends, my teachers, even my supervisors here, and your crush and Mr. Berg I could see, and Dale, yes, and I'm happy to see, and Katarina Vezoli, Lisbeth Myers, wow, I'm happy to see all of you. That's really, I'm happy. And I want to say that I'm not only one here, also here is presenting my colleagues from Kyiv, from our society. They also took part in our meeting. And I hope also maybe they have some comments about what they thought about what's going on, and maybe a little bit later. I'm really also thanks for Tina, because my family, my boys and my wife staying in his home now. And it's happened in when I have been in Ljubljana in December. Tina said me directly, if something happened, please, my home, your home. And of course we're smiling and think, no, it's nothing could be happened. Yes, it just it's very pleasant to hear, but it's happened. You could imagine that. And now my family in Tina home, and I'm very thankful for him.
I'm very happy that I have such nice new members of the family.
Okay, I want to talk with you about some phenomenon. I think you understand me right and deeply, because I think idea of activism, it's very close to something very close to topic of indifferent citizen in Ukraine. Yes, because I think I have not the strict plan of my papers. I try to improvise, because my previous papers a little bit about another thing. But I want to talk with you about what's going on last 30 years in Ukraine. When I was young, yes, I grew up in Soviet Union, and we couldn't reflect themselves very much. Just with years, I tried to come back to these events, to these some points, and try to understand our state of mind in this period of time. And I think it's very easy to describe using the Jungian terms persona, first of all. Persona, because in the old Soviet Union, nobody believes to the Marxism or Leninism or such idea. Nobody. We lived in society without any idea of or any ideology. This is like empty ideology. All of us playing in some game. We are not serious. We are not serious pioneers. We are not serious Komsomol. We are not serious member of Communist Party. Everybody playing in such game like illusion. And this is a common mood of society. It's like a persona society, false self for Winnicott maybe terms. And you know, if you try to understand maybe school psychology, nobody likes people who studied well. Nobody respect people who was like playing to be authoritative or to be some activists. Activism looks very strange. It's like just a simulation, simulation of activism. And the Soviet Union died in the situation of nobody cares. Nobody cares about Soviet Union. That's a whole mood of our society. And all of us goes from this time. But we goes from this time to different way. I mean, for example, another republic of USSR, and Ukraine. We have different way and different story and history of activism. In the beginning, in 90s, we had also the terrible catastrophe, Chernobyl catastrophe, when also it was example of indifferent citizens from one point, but it was in my point also example of absolutely strange reaction of people, because people also not couldn't understand what's going on long period of time. Just with time we understand what's going on in the center of Europe. And this society, it's a society of absolutely double-faced leaders who have absolutely two faces, and for inner using and for external using, like you know, this idea of persona. And just one part of society looks enough vivid in this period of time. Not one, two of them. In 90s, in my point, it was dissidents. It were dissidents who staying in Stalin prisoners. It is, first of all, it's Ukrainian nationalists who came back to the Soviet cities from the prisons, and they bring some absolutely new energy, absolutely new ideology. It's so strange. It looks very strange when in parliament of 300 peoples, just 5-6 dissidents absolutely change the psychological climate of this parliament. From another side, it were the young people, of course, my generation. They, between us also, we are not changed of this Soviet period of time, because we never believe of them, of this social communist idea. And you know, it's very strange union between Senex and Puer. No, it's like a very strange link between these two very special kind of people in our society. But it's a very little part of Ukrainian society. And main society in Ukraine, like in Russia, like in other post-Soviet country, it was absolutely indifferent to political or to activity. But you know, it's a 90s finished of the student revolution. We have a student revolution in 90s. We call this revolution on the granite of the stone. It's in the Maidan, in our central square in Kyiv. Student organized the protest. It's protest. They refused to food, and they keep this situation during maybe some months, and they destroyed the government. It was absolutely looks impossible, but it was fantastic victory for students. You know, maybe truly saying, maybe this elite just changing the power and using student for that, but students feels that they could change something. You know, it's like grows up of some very tired, very young power of activism in Ukraine. And after that, maybe, you know, we have a lot of protests around the killing of journalists, Gangadze. Maybe you heard this this name, because whole Ukraine fighting for that, and we have a lot of wide protest for that. Thanks for in this killing, in this massacre, also we blamed the president Leonid Kuchma, and this protest is also successful. It was successful because with time President Kuchma also came. He didn't go to the next election, and that's a second victory of freely citizens. And the third, maybe you know, we have the Orange Maidan, Orange Revolution, when we fight for the true election, yes, against falsification, and we also win. You know, we also win just timely, maybe just a little period of time, 4 years, Yushchenko win. And after these 4 years, we also have the reaction and comeback. But this is also very important victory. And the fourth victory, it's a Maidan. Maybe it's Maidan, and it happened in 2013. After Maidan, we a lot of things happened: annexion of Crimea, war in the East Ukraine, and we have war in Russia now. I mean, this war just continues from this time. You know, and during this all victory, we have a lot of success. I mean, we could we take a free media, free press, and but in another hand, we have a very big shadow. Also, our very strange post-Soviet reality survived through the huge movement, like a also double-faced. I mean, there's a corruption way of surviving, because, you know, nobody feels the government like something their own. You know, government looks like something external, not internal. And this is provoked to play some game with government. We have a situation when even more moral profession, like, for example, teachers and doctors, became very corrupted, and policemen became very corrupted. It's not only the question of high rank government or, you know, bureaucrat. No, we have a corruption in a whole level of society, and the fourth our revolution, the Maidan, we call this Maidan like revolution of dignity. First of all, it was Maidan of anti-corruption core. We fight against corruption. That's the meaning of Maidan. And by the way, nobody protest against Russia in Maidan. You know, nobody protest against Putin in Maidan. But, you know, this has happened. When we protest against corruption, we have a new, very strong enemy, Mr. Putin. And that's and now we have a situation now. I think, in my point, you could read this letter of Donald Kalschet letter. Could you read it? I think Donald Kalschet using a lot of very important point of this, and maybe you could make some links between my words and the words of Donald Kalschet.
I will try to read it. I'm not best in reading in English, so I would apologize, but I will do my best, okay?
You are in the middle of hard brain trauma. You are fighting for the soul of your country. You are fighting for the soul of the world. This battle puts you side by side with the early American revolutionaries who is fight for freedom and democracy in 1776 against the tyrannical occupation of our country by a brutal monarchy in England. Near where I live, in Concord, Massachusetts, there are monuments, those brave men and women who stood their ground against the British and fired the shot heard around the world. That's all. Yes, I'm just, but that is, it is not an end of. Okay. And I want to say something also about what's going on now. Everybody knows this idea about the hybrid warfare. But what does it mean for my understanding, how we could see that? You know, we have some, and of course we feel it through our activity and how we understand that, how we try to understand that. I want to clarify something about the concept of hybrid war. It is always conducted in two echelons. This was a case in 1938 at the Anschluss of Austria, and it still works today. In the first echelon comes peaceful, wonderful, pleasant Russians or Germans, speakers, German or Russian speakers, inhabitants of the empire, and spread the glorious Russian, German classical culture. And a conscious Ukrainian, sorry.
Привет. Можешь говорить?
Не можу, Оля.
Зрозуміло, пока-пока.
Sorry.
Извини.
Okay. 1 minute. I try to, yes. And conscious Ukrainians, we have this like phrase, conscious Ukrainians. It's like it's maybe some synonyms of not indifferent citizens, quickly find themselves in the position of paranoids who are nationalists and are enemies of culture in general. The position of our Jungian colleagues from Russia is interesting. They do not publicly state any position, typically, but allow themselves to be defended by our Ukrainian colleagues. Moreover, it should be added that no one insulted or attacked Russian colleagues at all. For 8 years, there had been no insult from us, but you know, but at the same time, for some reason, they are so systematically and obsessively protected as if they were children. They are internationally recognized analysts, but at the same time observe our controversy without any interfering. When the work of the first echelon of the hybrid war is done, the second enters with the neglect of borders, the destruction of our cities and our people. You watch it all live. Now we can listen to telephone conversation of Russian soldiers with their families. We hear an example of our culture that raised marauders, psychopaths, and murderers. So I want to ask my Russian colleagues, maybe you'd better work with your psychopathic population, as Elena Bartulova did before emigrating from Russia. She reported the very nice paper in Avignon about that. Why do we need your training? The work of Russians in Ukraine remind me not a good stories of propaganda in during the Soviet time. Now we are on the, I don't know, maybe you ask me something because I'm a little bit, I feel I'm a little bit mixing feeling and maybe not maybe you ask me or
thank you, Dimitro, for now, for this presentation. I guess you were reading the letter from the chat, and not the whole letter was copied, I saw. Stefano, would you mind to read the letter? I have sent it to you in the email.
Yes. Message to Ukrainian therapist from Donald Kashet, PhD. My friend Oksana Yakushko, I hope I pronounced it correctly, has suggested that some of you who know my work on trauma might appreciate a few words of support in the midst of this terrible nightmare we are suffering at the hands of Vladimir Putin and his war machine. Let me start by saying how proud I am of you, the people of Ukraine, for you inspiring and courageous stand against tyranny and autocracy. As you know, I have written about trauma and the soul. You are in the middle of heartbreaking trauma, and you're fighting for the soul of your country. You're fighting for the soul of the world. This battle puts you side by side with the early American revolutionaries who fought for freedom and democracy in 1776 against the tyrannical occupation of our country by a brutal monarchy in England. Near where I live, in Concord, Massachusetts, there's a monument to those brave men and women who stood their ground against the British and fired the shot heard round the world. Donald Kashed.
Thank you.
If you
This is, yes, this is not the end of the letter, but main part, more important part, you read. I think it's okay. I have some question for me. Yes.
Yes, Dimitro, if you allow, let me suggest this. Some question will be posted in the chat, but if you also want, if people raise their hands, not in the real sense, but electronically, they can ask you a question live. So we will unblock your mic and this will happen. And if you allow me, I would like to share a question with you while people raise their hands and get ready for the questions.
Okay.
There are many interpretations.
I try to answer about this, about description of hybrid war, first and second echelon, what I mean.
Okay.
That's, I think that's a, you know, the first echelon, it's very artificial description from me, but it's like a principle if you try to understand deeply, because it's like a two-part of activity in the hybrid war. The one part of activity, it's very pleasant part of activity. You know, we are a neighbor of Russian empires, and Russian empires using a lot of pleasant thing for the for controlling our territory and our people, you know, and it looks like sometimes it's intelligent and nice people, and sometimes we could see that in psychological world, you know, and it's typical, they goes firstly very smoothly and pleasantly, but the second who goes after them, typically with tanks and with guns and with machine guns, you know, it's a very typical way of controlling of territory. Yes, and we are very you know, I couldn't see any our colleagues from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. I think they is a very good expert about the hybrid war. I think they understand very good about what it means. I think hybrid war, it's not creating, it's not something new, it's old thing. And this has happened all time when autocratic regime met with democracy, you know, and autocratic regime and autocratic country, typically they have a plan, and they have some obsession of ego controlling of they have a plans of everything. Yes, and democracies, they have not, we have not a plans of you know, we haven't a deep plans. It's a little bit chaotic. It's, and I think it's looks like very often like some struggle between ego principle and unconscious principle, because, you know, I love very much the some point of Jung about that, when he talk about the state when we working with patient, we try to create some state of flexible, try to understand some unconscious movement try to support this movement, yes, and typically in this situation, it's confronting with some ego plans, because our neighbors, they have ego plans, and that's a very black and white approach, and it's like conspirology. Everything controlling some smart people. Some smart people make plan about all of us. But democratic people didn't think about smart plan. We just live freely, you know, and that's a huge, big difference. But we have a very good privilege. We have some part of society grows up like not in different people, not in different people. Then this part of societies, it's not organized of party, not organized of some political events. That's just freely people who became to work for the freedom. You couldn't even, I try to, I'm staying near Kyiv. And organized here, it's working for self-defense. It's people from village, they have guns, they have machine guns, they have you know, in Ukraine we have no problem with weapons, and they have just self-organized. And I came to him like medical doctor. Now we have a situation when our army is much more better organized than the people on the place. And I make a decision to stay with my people who staying around Kyiv, because nobody knows how they have a plan surrounding Kyiv, and we're staying here to protect Kyiv from the south. And you couldn't imagine how this is work. People doing that everything themselves without, nobody rules us. Nobody rules us. I think we just read it in the story of early American I don't know, or it's happened in Holland Revolution against Spain. I don't know. That's now we have this process.
Dmytro, if you allow me, I
Yes.
would like to continue reading the letter. Because I didn't have the full letter before. Near where I live in Concord, Massachusetts, there's a monument to those brave men and women who stood their ground against the British and fired the shot heard round the world. With that shot, they started a revolution. But it wasn't just a revolution to throw off the oppression of an occupying power. They didn't know it then, but what they started was a revolution in consciousness. It was a revolution dedicated to the position that all men and women are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of a full life. Your battle is part of that revolution in consciousness. Dictators will always rise up against this new consciousness because they are afraid of it. But the fight for democracy, for equality, for diversity, and for the sacred reality that all people on this planet contain the spark of a God-given right to life and liberty is far bigger than any one battle, and it must be waged over and over again in every generation. Those of you who work with traumatized individuals know that this is the same battle waged in the inner world between a life promoting new democratic consciousness and the violent, oppressive, anti-life forces in the psyche. Now you are engaging this battle in the streets. You're fighting for much more than survival. You're fighting for a new birth of freedom and for a new and revolutionary consciousness that is slowly taking place on this earth. You're fighting for a transcendent moral center for you, for your nation. Despite your current trauma, you are fighting for the soul. I salute you. May God bless you and keep you safe in this hour of darkness and in your struggle toward the light. If I may humbly add something, Dmytro. I was trying to understand what is going on. Many commentators say that Ukrainians want to go west. West is Europe, west is the US, McDonald's, Hollywood, and all that bullshit. Actually, I will try to say something in a more superficial way than Donald Kashid, but for me, what is happening now, what is happening since many years actually, since the Maidan revolution or the Orange Revolution, is your call not to go west just for McDonald's or Hollywood, but is a wish to be, as much as possible, a country where institution, society, so structure in sociological terms, can hold off from authoritarian coups, from a one-man show. It's not the benefit of what the West could provide, but is really that possibility to go back to what the Greeks called democracy. This is the consciousness I believe Donald is talking about. Being able to choose for yourself. This is the freedom, the concept of freedom you are helping us to get in contact with, because we lost that sense of freedom, especially those of my generation or younger. Thank you for your courage, Dmytro. And thank you also to our Russian friends who are here tonight, who are in our list, who spoke up with courage. Now, please, you can write your questions.
Please also, if someone wants to comment, to raise the hand, question or comment.
Your Garashe wants, but please don't raise your hands like this because we are too many. Click on the link. Jorg, I think you are unmuted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah, so just a short question. If this is the a kind of cultural revolution you are doing now, yeah, a cultural revolution, this must be a horror vision, horror idea for Putin. Do we have an idea how Putin's mind is working? Is he paranoid, or what is in the mind of this dictator?
I think he is not paranoid. I think he is not a crazy. I think he is obsessed. It looks like obsession. And you know, how I understand that, I don't know, but I'm just think about that. I just try to imagine how feel the person who have not any contact with another, I mean other from the big letter, you know. He couldn't contact to anybody, you know. Everybody agree with him. Everybody try to talk with him and keep his idea. You could imagine. It's a absolutely crazy surrounding. It's like a sensor deprivation, and it's a mental deprivation. It's a conversation deprivation. And I think he of course he a little bit mad and obsessed about the He is really couldn't contact with reality, and his puppets, they deeply not understand Ukrainians, absolutely, because during these 30 years we have a free election. You know, we couldn't observe that directly, but my peasants, I mean people, simple people in my village, they change so deep. They think and they make a choice. They know about who is the deputy they support. They know about that. And, you know, we have a political life. And we have a huge distance with Russian. It's 30 years distance. They don't understand that. You couldn't explain to even intellectual Russian. They couldn't understand that.
I would like, before Dennis Merritt will ask you a question, I would like to raise some comments from the chat. Amanda Horn is saying it's important that we don't idealize the West. And I personally totally agree. After all, she says, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya were attacked by these democracies. I don't know if it's tonight the right place or time, but the big question is also, what is Putin doing so different than the Americans, than the British in the 20th century, than the Roman Empire 2000 years ago? Of course, we know the difference, and I personally believe that the difference is in what Jung's writing after the catastrophe. But please, if we are analysts and activists, let's remember that it's very easy to be polarized between the goods and the bads. I personally don't think that what Putin is doing now is very different than what Amanda Horn underlined. Dennis.
Oh, boy. I know a lot of Jungians are pretty negative about Jordan Peterson, but I think he had a brilliant interview with some Russian expert, and the way he described where Putin is now has made so much sense to me. I could provide you with the link if you're interested, but I mean, it is so painful to see what's happening in the Ukraine. I think it's very different from Afghanistan and other things, because nobody could imagine this happening in Europe in the 21st century. And I'm wondering if it seems to me that we would not be standing by if the ultimate threat that we can all imagine is a nuclear war. And it's unbelievable that the Russians shelled that largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And I'm just wondering if you feel that in Ukraine that that is what may be preventing the West from getting involved more. It's just hard to see this level of brutality on the screens every night. And it seems like this is an ultimate threat that we can imagine that Putin could follow through on, is nuclear war or bombing those facilities. One of the, I think it was on Hulu, had a program on Chernobyl and how the Russian authorities couldn't handle the reality there. And it's just fearful to think about if they're, how conscious they are about the dangers of bombing these facilities.
Thank you, Dennis. Back to Dmytro, if he wants to add something, and then to Luigi.
About nuclear, we you know, we just psychologically, if they do that, we couldn't do anything, you know. I became a little bit fatalist about that. I tried to we are not thinking about these possibilities, you know. We do everything what we should do, and our government care about safety of power plant, but I don't know, we couldn't controlling anything around that, and I don't know, I really don't know. If something happened with nuclear power, we and all of us, we will be in the one boat. That's true.
Luigi.
Okay, I just wanted to pick up again what Stefano was saying, and that is not to polarize between good and evil. Okay, of course, we are in the West not blameless, but the point is also, as we are analysts and we were speaking of this inner dance, that remember that each of us has a so-called adjusted and another potentially paranoid polarity. That's the point. If you, of course, in certain historical, but even in our families' circumstances, it can be activated, and in other not. And as it has been recalled that Putin withdraws, let's remember that during World War II, both Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin all had a certain point after which they given up the submersion in the crowd they were used and the communication. And so this, of course, contributed to the isolation, although being in the crowd, of course, is a false being with. And yet it is still a being with. If one withdraws totally, one fosters in oneself the potentially paranoid, that is the blaming everything 100% outside, which is unpsychological and unpolitical, of course.
Thank you, Luigi.
Yeah, let me say, Dmytro, that a funny coincidence, my book on paranoia in history will be published soon in Russian, if that goes on, of course, because there was also years ago another publisher and then it stopped. But again, funny in this moment, interesting.
Yeah, it's but you know, I doesn't care about publishing in Russia. I care about publishing your book in Ukraine, and we have a good example of your book. It's very history of arrogance. Yes, history of arrogance. And you know, when we talk with you in Milano in the Greek cafe, we also talk about Putin. You remember? We try to talk about him, yes. And nothing changed from this time. I think it just craziness goes deeper and deeper.
If you allow me.
No, and you know, I try to, maybe I'm trying to little bit support all of you. I mean, it's maybe funny. It's that I am in my position support you, and I think you should be quiet about that. You couldn't imagine what the people movement goes in Ukraine now. We never stop now. We never stop now. It's so a lot of angry and hate and power and quiet. You know, we understand we should shock this empire, and we will do that. We will shock this empire for the end. That's our goal, and we will do that.
If you allow me, Svetlana Alexievich said that war is male. We could talk about this, but up to now, only males took the microphone. So please, women, we need your voice too. There are many messages. I will read them in a moment. Now I let the microphone to Shmuel Bernstein.
Thank you. Good evening. I gave a paper in the Kyoto conference about the Western world as Salmakis pond of the mythology about the Hermaphroditus. And my point was that the Western world is the masculine aspect in the Western world is weakened. And now I'm very annoyed by the avoidance of the United States and NATO to help the Ukrainian. I think this is the same avoidance, the same weakening of the masculine aspect. They could show Putin who is really strong here and not let him to be such a cruel man and do what the atrocities is army doing in Ukraine. That's my comment.
Thank you. Sorry.
I don't know, but in my point, if we go democratic way, it means we could hurt everybody. I mean, women's, children's, old people, young people, you know, different kind of part of society. Russian-speaking Ukrainians, Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians, you know, Jewish or nationalist, different kind of Ukrainians we could hurt. But now, all of us working together, you know, all of us, and that's because we need the everybody. If we look, what's the difference with West? Because you couldn't understand what does it mean to lost the freedom. You live in freedom like air. You couldn't understand that you could live without air, but we understand what that means. It's very close. We could see how people live without air, without freedom, you know. And of course, in this point, Ukrainians, it's that's example of Donald culture. It's very good because we really feel the deep contact with the early democracy movement, like in French democracy or Holland democracy or American democracy.
Now, let me continue with my request for women voices. It seems that male like to talk into a micro and women like to talk into the chat. So Eba, Anna, Amanda, Kati, Caroline, Tom Singer, please raise your hand and don't just share a message. It would be really valuable if you could add your bit. Shmuel and Luigi, you can put your hands down. Good. Ursula, thank you.
Hi, Dimitri. It has been a long time since you have been in my very first trauma seminar that I gave in Moscow. I'm very glad to see that you are safe. My question, my comment is, first of all, I see, I wonder where you are located, but it seems that you are safe. That's the first thing. The second thing, I was thinking of all of your colleagues who were in this very first seminar of the Jungian training. There were 22 people. The way I recall, you were the only one from Ukrainian. And so my question is a relational question. Being female, maybe I am more interested in relational issues. So what is it like for you now? Are you still in contact with your fellow students and colleagues? They are all now also Jungian IAP colleagues. They are all Russians. Because I work a lot with people from the Baltic countries, and so I know about the anxieties and the personal relational problems that exist. So I wonder, how do you feel about your Russian colleagues with whom you shared seminars and supervision in my trauma seminars?
You know, I staying in the war during 8 years, you know, and when in 2014, when the first invasion from Russia happened, I have a situation when I'm working in Krasnodar in supervision program like supervisor. And I talk openly with my colleagues about situation, and I ask them about possibility I should finish work with them. And I provided 2 visits for say goodbye, and I finished this project. Because I think it's impossible to masquerade such deep conflict and playing and hiding to the some professional masks. It's impossible. And you know, I keep some personal contact with my friend from Russia. Mm-hmm. But typically it's a situation when my friends, they hate situation with Crimea and they hate situation with Donbass. They support us. In another case, we stop, I'm stop talking and contact with my colleagues from Russia, especially in situation when even our Jungian colleagues, some of them support annexion of Crimea, support, they say that nothing happened in Donbass with Russia. Russia, it's not involving in Donbass, for example, you know. It's very difficult to keep contact with these people, you know. And Ursula, look, the Donald Kalschat, he says a very important point. We are staying in the center of trauma, in the center, you know. We haven't a neurotic position now. We couldn't have, because we fight. You know, we should be strong. And maybe I dreamt about that. Maybe we find some time in the future when we could talk about what's going on now, but not now, you know.
But, thank you for sharing this. But as you also perhaps know, in my book, Trauma and Beyond, The Mystery of Transformation, I also write and believe in a dynamic process of rupture and repair. And from your understanding, at least if I understood you correctly, you believe there is no rupture and repair process possible for you. Is that correct?
Now,
Yes.
yes. Maybe in future, maybe just in
Yes.
future.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, look, I'm a doctor, of course. But I should support my mates for killing people. Do you understand that?
Yes, yes.
Just my mates, I'm support them. I working with them. I should support them because we are the killer now, and we want to kill a lot of Russians. You know, this is our reality.
I listen. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Dmytro, for this reality check. Tom?
Yes, I think the geopolitical reality, which is really hard for us to face in the United States, or at least many of us, is that Putin's threat of nuclear war has handcuffed us. And the fact is, I don't think the West will come, I don't know this, of course, for sure, but I fear that the West will not intervene in a way that is necessary because of the fear of starting a third world war. And I think that leaves the Ukrainian people very much alone in terms of the defense that they need. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the geopolitical reality is that the threat of thermonuclear war is keeping many in the West handcuffed.
Yeah, that's a very good metaphor. Yes, like because we are all like hostages of this behavior. We feel the same. But Thomas, it's interesting. Sometimes we feel that our young democracy using West for our freedom. And you know, this truly saying we feel a lot of support from the West. We feel in you know, in different way, from the anti-aircraft missiles or to the anti-tanks some supplies from the West. You know, we feel some very strong support and humanitarian and money and people and emotionally and psychologically. We did it. We are very thankful for the West people, and this is we even wonder about that because we haven't such reaction in 2014 because we feel very much alone-less. But now situation much more different, you know.
Well, I think, am I still speaking? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. I think what your people in Ukraine have done is renew at least in America, the spirit of democratic revolution, not the spirit of McDonald's, but the spirit of democratic revolution. And what remains to be seen, because this kind of coming together in this way, we're incredibly fragmented in the United States, and we're coming together in a way around the Ukrainian situation that in some ways is far more surprising than Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's true. Absolutely. But, you know, for Ukrainians, of course, we are not very high estimating McDonald's. You know, Ukrainians looks like hobbits from, you know, because we want to eat a lot and very tasty, and we preparing the food, and we love a lot of comfort. You know, we are enough lazy people, you know, and this is and this standard for us, it's to be it's a freedom, you know, like a hobbit from the Shire.
Tine, and then Luigi, and then June.
Yes, I wanted to share some things also from personal experience from war. What it reminded me, I can still remember in Slovenia, our idea was we will separate from Yugoslavia, and the West will help us because we want democracy, we want capitalism, and so on. We want to join the West. And when we did this, they didn't help us. At that time, it was Warren Zimmerman, the ambassador in Belgrade, who actually threatened that if we separate, US will never recognize us. And other European countries did support, like morally or in a certain way, but no one came to fight. You know, we had this idea of if the war starts, someone will intervene, you know, like a child. But when things got serious, no one came, you know. So the lesson was you have to help yourself. Now, at the beginning, I saw this situation similar, and also a bit this nuclear threat kind of excuse, because I don't think even Putin is so crazy he would do this, but it's a nice excuse. But what I see on the other side now, what's happening in Europe with this sanction, that Europe really stepped together in many ways. The certain initiative to take in Ukraine into European Union, and to get really with really strong sanctions, which are hurting us also. So it's not like the sanction before, which no one noticed. But now really also Europe is prepared to bleed, actually. And I guess in democracy, it's always the question, you know, if politicians do such move or go to war, it can be dangerous for them. They can lose elections. And this is always a certain rationale behind why I think no one intervenes. But still, as I was maybe first pessimistic, I see a different energy in Europe, much more united, much more ready to step in. And somehow I feel, and this is on the level of feeling, that Europeans really feel that here this question of consciousness, of plurality, of democracy, of a certain, this fire of consciousness, Western, is on the stake. This is at least my feeling, that in Europe we are now much more aware. It's not just Ukraine, it's much more what is happening here. Okay, thank you.
Luigi?
Yes, try to connect some of these geopolitical and some psychological aspects. And Tine, I think you were speaking of what we might call the mistakes of optimism. We need optimism, but to use for once not Jungian, but a psychoanalytic category, maybe a good enough optimism or good enough pacifism, not to be too aggressive. But for instance, this Dimitro might tell us something more about that. I remember very clearly when 30 years ago, the Soviet Union was dissolved and Ukraine pledged immediately to give back all nuclear weapons. Don't forget that there was an enormous arsenal of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. and the country gave them back. What means back? To Moscow. Had not this optimistic line won and had nuclear weapons partly remained in Ukraine, of course, history and politics is not Fanta politics, but maybe the situation could be worse, but maybe the situation could be much better than it is now. It's relative, I think. So relative to the possibility of making mistakes of optimism. And when you see, for instance, American democracy from the perspective of Concord, Massachusetts, maybe one shouldn't totally forget that these American patriots were in Concord, Massachusetts, because they had already wiped away native populations which had been there. Thank you.
Grazie, Luigi. June.
Thank you thank you very, very much. And thank you for inviting me to this wonderful event. We have, of course, so many wonderful contributions here. I hope I can keep my perspective focused on one contribution. As a member, as a US citizen, I have seen a lot of change in this country. And I think the polarization, the critical polarization that we are seeing right now actually has been very predictable. If we have, as Howard Zinn says, if we know the people's history of the United States, this polarization here in many ways are exposing some a number of fractures in this country that is leaving this country right now fragile. There's a lot of paranoia, there's a lot of reaction, and we know what kind of psychic movement can come out of that. In my observation, the US to a certain extent is being kept out of the negotiations that are going on, perhaps for good reasons. Our own relationship with our neighbors to the south are fragile as well. We have inner social sectors which have very fragile relationships with one another. So I think the Biden rhetoric is of unity is not as reliable as we might think. And also in terms with Europe, I think European democracy has grown and matured a lot since the early 20th century wars. And unfortunately, our democracy that Kalsha talks about is a democracy that is a sacred democracy that is coming together in many places. Unfortunately, it has been lost to some extent in the US. So what am I trying to say here? I think we need, the focus is on the democracy that we are seeing fight for existence in many third world countries now. And this is, as Jung says, civilization is grown, is extended one person at a time. I see this is where our work is. I'm not sure that I've made any concrete points, but I hope that I have added something. Thank you.
Thank you, June.
Thank you.
Mark? Yeah, Dmytro.
Can I maybe react a little bit? Maybe I'm not understand everything and understand clear what you say, but I think what about you saying in my point, it's a little differentiation in democracy process. Yes, democracy, it's a lot of little differentiation. And you could mention different kind of democracy, yes. And this is also, I'm just, I want to also talk about some point, think about our perception. You know, if we have democracy, we have a perception, very clear perception, because we could see different point of view, different point of and different position. And what happened now, it's for Russia, for Putin, it's happened that's just they not understand what's going on in Ukraine, absolutely, because their propaganda lie a lot, but it's like a snake who take his, who bite his tail, because they believe to their propaganda, yes? They talk about a fantastic Russian army, second on the war, but we could see this army, you know, comparably with this soldier, Ukrainian soldier, looks like, I don't know, like star troops, I don't know, very good equipment, absolutely, we have not any compare, you know, this is, we could see this, they like in this blindless. Thank you, June.
Martin, Caroline, Tom, and Mallory. Martin, you have to unmute your microphone.
Dima, firstly, I'm really glad to see that you're well and Oksana is well, and to hear that your children are both well. That's the one thing tonight that makes me happy, because we're not in a happy place. I wanted to say just a couple of things. Firstly, I'm glad that you're in contact still with your colleagues from Moscow and Russia who support you. I think many of us on this site, the Analysis and Activism, know that there was a letter posted by two of your colleagues, Anna Gazakova and Masha, drafted by them, which many of us on this site then signed. And it was signed by a lot of your friends and colleagues in Russia. Anna then told me she had to take the letter offline because she said she was too afraid of being imprisoned for 15 years when that letter came to light. I asked her to send me a copy. She has sent me a copy of the letter, and also to a colleague in Poland, along with all the signatories, which Stefano, you may also have it. It's 68 pages of signatories in support of Ukraine and against Putin. That's the first thing. I'd just like you to know, you have a lot of friends there, Dima. Second thing I wanted to say was something about psychopathy and the concept of psychopathy. I'm sure many of us remember the book that Guggenbull Craig wrote, which raised the question, why do psychopaths not rule the world? And then we see how many psychopaths
actually have got into positions where they have certainly ruled their countries, and many of them ruled half the world. We only have to think of Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Saddam Hussein, and so on and so on. And I would include Putin in that category. The question that I've been thinking about for a long time is, how do democracies deal with psychopathic leaders? How do we deal with the psychopathic leaders in our own countries as well? And we have seen those in Iraq, for example, where they, I think American and other NATO forces behaved in quite psychopathic ways towards the Iraqi population. Well, the other thing is, the question is raised, why is NATO fearful of getting involved in Ukraine? And I'm sure you're right. It's because we're afraid that Putin will launch a tactical nuclear strike, probably against the Baltic, one of the Baltic states initially. And then the whole of NATO will be involved. My own fear is somewhat worse in a way. I fear that Putin, because of his psychopathic behavior, will deal with Ukraine the way he dealt with Chechnya in Grozny and with Aleppo in Syria. He destroyed two beautiful cities. And when he had destroyed all the buildings and he could not destroy the people, he launched chemical weapons. But Putin is on the point of launching chemical weapons against the people of Mariupol. The citizens of Mariupol, we all know, I think, have not been allowed to flee the city. On about 4 occasions, they have stopped them fleeing, and they have continued to starve them, so they have no food, they have no water, and no heat. And now Russia has gone to the United Nations, and they're saying, we think that America and Ukraine are understand psychopathic behavior and mind. We know that what he is doing is saying, I am about to launch chemical weapons in the same way I did in Syria, because I was able to bring Aleppo to its knees in 10 days after 2 years of bombarding it, using chemical weapons. And when he uses those chemical weapons, we in the West will be blamed for, oh, your chemical weapons unfortunately were hit by a rocket of ours and you have killed all your people. That is my fear now. And I think Putin holds the threat of nuclear strike over us while he then carries that out against Ukraine. The question is, can we in the West respond in the way that Barack Obama did not respond when he told the Syrians that chemical weapons were a red line, and he did not follow it through? That's my fear, and that's my question to you, Dima. It's about psychopathy, and I'm sorry. I've been watching too much news recently, and it just makes me terribly afraid, and it makes me feel so connected to the people that I love in Ukraine and friends in Russia too. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I love you very much, and I just could fantasize about someday when we just hold each other by hand. Not, yeah, that's. And is a question of psychopathy. I think if we talk about Putin, I think we talk about pervert psyche, not psychopathic psyche. It's something perversive, something just a change in his mind, and he is not absolutely stupid, I think.
Psychopaths are not stupid.
Yeah, no. I mean, yes, yes.
He's certainly not stupid. He's very,
yes.
very clever.
I just think maybe a little bit more about some pervert thinking. Okay, thank you, Martin.
I'm worried about Mariupol.
Yeah.
Caroline, you have to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Stefano. I'm taken aback by how I'm so sobered and sombered by what is being discussed. It's been dizzying and grounding at the same time to hear the range, geopolitical and sociocultural and historical, and here and now, the threat and the tensions. But what's going to stay with me the most, Dmytro, is your response to Ursula and your willingness to share the cost of what it means to live in the heart of the situation and to not be in a neurotic position and to consciously live in the trauma, in the heart of the trauma. So I have no question. I just wanted to thank you for your willingness to be with us today. That's all.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you.
Tom?
Thank you. In fact, my comment is related very much to what Martin was talking about in a sense, and to what's been already mentioned. But yesterday there was an article in The Guardian by a Russian author, Dmytro Zaleskyi, if I pronounce his name correctly. And what he brought up in that article, which was very moving in his way of doing that, was what he spoke about was that he now understood the silence of the elders of from previous generations in his country, who also had were victims of terrible abuse with the gulags and Stalin's policies, and it was sort of he was, I thought, inviting his people, his fellow Russians, to really reconsider their silence, but in a way that was very understandable given the current situation and conditions in Russia for them. The response to the letter that Martin mentioned, yes, of course she had to take that letter offline because it was much too dangerous for her and putting her in a very vulnerable position. And the echoes of those comments echo very much Kalshed's work on the effects of trauma, collective trauma, and that it is not easy. As I'm in such admiration of the courage and the determination and the patriotism of the Ukrainian soldiers and of the population in general, and it is in such contrast to the fear that reigns in Russia among the Russians. And you sort of see these two polarities in an impossible tension. And God knows where it's going to lead us. And Martin and I share a lot of your fears as well. But I think it's also important for us to consider that aspect, the control that a despotic, demonic leader can have and exert on the people under him to cut them off from their rights and their ability to speak and to bring forth their disagreement. And those, as we have seen, those who have done so have, of course, been silenced immediately. And so it's not very encouraging what we see and where we are. But that, Kalshed's comments about that the traumatization and how it can paralyze. And I think that's part of what's happening, at least in a portion of the population in Russia. And again, Dmitry, such admiration for you, for your colleagues, for your countrymen. And God knows we wish you all the best, and let's hope for the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Look, in a question of collective trauma, you know, this is a really big difference to how to relate it to the government level, not only personal level, but government level, to our collective trauma. Because in Ukraine, we have a lot of works, lot of contact with Holodomor, with our great hunger, and with the trauma of a Second World War. Because for us, it's days of the crying and mourning. But you know, in Russia, they celebrating victory. The Stefano Carpani mentioned about Svetlana Alexievich. Yes, that's the best point of about the war in Russia. They celebrating. They couldn't contact with a really deep sorrow and trauma of that. But in Ukraine, we did it, and I think that's also something going spontaneously, democratical way, because people in the second generation, they need to cry about previous collective trauma. They have this need, and if a government blame of that, it's not happened. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Very well put. Thank you.
Mallory.
Hi. I wanted, is it Dmytro? Is that how I say it? Dmytro? Yes. Okay. Did you say in the beginning that you didn't think Putin was crazy, that he was smart? Or did I hear that wrong?
Yeah, I think he's a pervert, smart and perversive person.
Right, but I think that's giving him too much credit. I think that he is very sociopath, very pathological, another malignant narcissist, and he's been isolated for so long from everybody that I think he's just getting more emboldened in his delusions of grandeur. And I think it's not, I don't think it's a good idea to just mark him as very smart, because he's dangerous. And he is capable of nuclear warfare, not only in the Baltics, but also anywhere if he gets, if he gets out of his bounds enough. I was at a Morgan Stanley had a seminar with James Stavritis. He was a admiral in the Navy and retired, and now he's head of the Carlyle Group. And he said the same thing. And I wrote him a letter saying that I don't think that this is a wise thing to say, to allow him not to be crazy, because then we don't have to organize so well around it. The other thing I have a problem with that I think I heard you say was the division, the divisiveness, because the Russians are celebrating and the Russians are, not aligning with the Ukrainians. So I don't know if I'm getting the wrong news, but I think there are many, including where I'm in the Bay Area in California, near San Francisco. And there are people who are Russians who are protesting and are on the side of Ukraine because many are their relatives. And I think to inform, I think it's making it more difficult to say all Russians are not okay because of what they're doing. But I think that might be propaganda from Russia to Ukraine. I don't think, and I don't believe, and I don't want to believe that that is true. The other thing that I kind of remember that Jung was talking about, and I'm going to totally paraphrase this, is that when the unconscious is not dealt with, it manifests later as fate. And I think we're in that politically and climate changely and pretty much everything that's going on in the world right now. So this shadow is emerging, and hopefully the good guys will win. And I wish you all safety. And thank you for the fight. And I think it's great that it's getting people together around the world, not just isolating in Ukraine, but I know you guys are fighting. And we're just sitting here sending money or just looking and also feeling helpless, but not, gratefully, hopefully the Ukrainians will win this thing with the help of anybody else who can be in there on the ground and help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. Thank you. But I agree with you. It's not very important. He is crazy or he is smart or he is. It's much more important. He will be dead.
Well, I agree with that, but it is important when you're downplaying his pathology, because he's really capable of just going ballistic.
It's interesting. It's interesting discussion, but I think you ask me about some model of the future of Russia. I think the main point about Putin, what we know about him, he wants to survive, and he have a chance for surviving if he close the Russia like North Korea style, just close everything. This is, and he have 60% of people who support him. Another intellectual goes on to flee to the West, and he is surviving this situation, sitting on the bomb and rule some not rich country, but it's okay for Russia. That's also very, very not good, but very possible way. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no more questions. We have roughly 8 minutes. Maybe we come back to Europe, we come back to Ukraine. We've been in the past few comments very much in the US. But I think we have to remember where the conflict is, where people are really dying. Actually, I feel very hopeless and helpless, and this feeling grew even more during this conversation. And I want to thank you, Dmytro, because you're here with us. We are all safe home on our couches. I saw on Facebook pictures of you today patrolling with a big rifle. We don't have a fucking clue of what is going on there. This is the reality. Yeah. We wanted this meeting to be a big reality check for all of us sitting on our sofas and comfortable. Dmytro, you have the highest members of IAAP here. Is there something we can do for you?
Yes, I just want to introduce you maybe after 2-3 years to the conference in Kyiv, all of us, and I think we will doing that interesting, and maybe we talk about Chernobyl and about zone and about war. I don't know the topic, but that's my dream, to make the conference for activism in Kyiv.
Done. I think we all agree tonight. Yeah.
Yes. So the after Ljubljana, Kiev.
Yes, yes.
I am looking forward.
But we will not go to McDonald's. We have some good Ukrainian food.
Yes, yes, of course. Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. And Dmytro, take care of yourself.
Thank you, Stefano, for organizing this too. It was wonderful.
Indeed, yes, yes.
And thank you, Dima.
Yeah, thank you, and best wishes from Germany.
To you and your family and everyone in Ukraine.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
We keep you in our hearts.